years old. Her health, her heart is fragile.
And every hour and minute and second and every long night has been agony since then.
She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive.
We need your help.
In this case, no one, until a few days ago, has been looking at around that Uber delivery, that Uber drive. So what, if anything, can we learn, Joe Scott Morgan?
Well, certainly directionality. What route was taken, and also, look, as an old investigator, I want to know as much as I possibly can about the driver. That they have an awareness of her, maybe who she is, this sort of thing. Were they followed in any way? I think, and so any kind of players that might be involved in this peripheral. Look, we'll take anything, right? We'll take absolutely anything relative to the data that can be sourced. Where did this individual go before? Okay, he picked up Mrs. Guthrie. Where did he go after he picked up Mrs. Guthrie? I want to know everything about it in granular detail.
The surveillance camera mounted on Nancy's front porch first captured the unidentified male figure on January 11, 2025, nearly 3 weeks before she vanished. He was not there to knock. He was not there to deliver anything. He came back at least once more in the days that followed, analysts believe, in the period around January 20th, and again in the days immediately approaching the 30th. Same approach, same calculated awareness of the physical environment. He was learning her schedule. He was learning when her lights went on and when they went off. He was building a portrait of her daily life with a patience and precision that speaks to premeditation at the highest level. The question of whether he acted alone during those casing visits and on the night of the abduction itself is one that serious analysts have refused to dismiss. The surveillance footage captured across his multiple appearances shows a single individual. The clothing is consistent across visits. The approach is consistent. The behavioral rhythm is consistent. On the night of January 30th, the only things that changed were the weapon and the backpack. And yet the operational demands of an abduction of this complexity, executed against a target whose residence had been methodically studied over weeks, have led several investigators to conclude that at least 2 people were involved. The argument is not only logistical, though removing a barely ambulatory 84-year-old woman from a private residence in the dark does place real physical demands on any single actor. It is also behavioral. A perpetrator sustaining surveillance across multiple visits in a neighborhood he did not belong to, with a vehicle nobody has been able to identify, running undetected across multiple weeks. That level of sustained, unobserved presence is consistent with individuals who have both support and a plan built for more than one pair of hands. Whether a second figure existed and was simply never captured on the available footage, or whether one individual executed every element of this crime alone, remains genuinely unresolved. What the footage does not leave open to debate is the identity of the person who appeared at that front door, methodically, repeatedly, and with escalating intent. But what he may have done in the hours before he appeared at that door on January 30th is even more disturbing than the casing visits themselves. Analysts who have studied the behavioral profile of this perpetrator have raised a documented theory that he may have entered Nancy Guthrie's home before she returned from her daughter's that evening. That the window between the time Annie's husband dropped Nancy off and the moment the porch camera recorded him at 1:27 in the morning was not his first time inside that address on the night of the abduction. He had studied the property from the outside with a thoroughness the footage confirms across weeks. Whether he had also studied it from the inside, in the hours it sat empty, waiting for Nancy Guthrie to come home, is a dimension of this investigation that has not been publicly closed. He arrived at her door at 1:27 in the morning, and this time he was different. A weapon, a backpack. Analysts described him as arriving mission-ready. He moved to the camera near her front door and placed foliage over its lens, a deliberate act that tells us 2 things simultaneously. He knew the camera existed, and he was not in a hurry. The absence of urgency in that act is one of the most forensically significant details in this entire case, and it raises a question that cuts to the psychological core of who this perpetrator is. If he was careful enough to case this neighborhood across multiple visits spanning weeks, If he mapped the property, learned the schedule, and studied the environment with the meticulous attention the footage documents, why did he walk into that camera's frame at all? Why not simply approach from an angle that avoided the lens entirely? The answer analysts have argued is not carelessness. It is confidence. He operated from a belief, sustained across weeks of preparation, that there was no connection between himself and Nancy Guthrie that any investigator could establish. That even if the camera captured his image clearly, no database, no tip line, no detective was going to close the gap between that image and a name. He covered the lens not out of fear, but because covering it was a step in the plan he had already rehearsed. He moved without urgency because he genuinely believed he was untouchable. And for more than 80 days, operating in full view of a camera he chose not to avoid, he has been right. At 2:29 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker application disconnected. The digital signal tracking her cardiac activity through the quiet Arizona night went silent. In approximately 1 hour, the window between 1:27 and 2:29, she was gone. Now here is what this investigation has returned to with renewed urgency: the Uber ride itself. The vehicle's interior camera recorded Nancy Guthrie in those final hours before everything changed. Her condition, her demeanor, what she was wearing, whether she showed any signs of distress. That footage is evidence. But the exterior of that vehicle, what was visible through its cameras as it moved through the neighborhood, what vehicles might have been parked along those streets, what figures might have been visible in driveways or on sidewalks, that is a different category of evidence entirely. And the exterior cameras on a rideshare vehicle are not limited to a single perspective. Some Uber vehicles carry not only rear-facing passenger compartment cameras, but front-facing cameras as well, operating simultaneously. A front-facing camera mounted on the windshield of a rideshare vehicle traveling through Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood that evening would have captured every car parked along every street the driver passed, every driveway, every vehicle sitting at a curb that did not belong to the neighborhood it was parked in, every figure that resolved into a silhouette when headlights swept past it. Whether the specific Uber that transported Nancy that night carried forward-facing cameras, and whether those cameras recorded anything along that route that has not yet been examined, is a question that investigators with access to the vehicle's full data configuration are now positioned to answer, and answer in granular detail. Where did that driver go before picking Nancy up? Where did he go after he dropped her off? What was parked on her street when he arrived? What was still there, or newly arrived, when Annie's husband returned her home hours later? Every data point attached to that vehicle is potentially probative, and the full picture of what it captured has not yet been publicly established. Because if the perpetrator was already positioned in that neighborhood when Nancy Guthrie was picked up, already running his surveillance operation in the hours before the abduction, then those cameras may have captured him. Not intentionally, not as the subject of anyone's attention, but incidentally, the way so many criminals have been caught, as background figures in footage taken for an entirely different purpose. Consider the power of incidental vehicle footage. Brian Koberger's white Hyundai Elantra was captured on camera after camera in the neighborhoods surrounding the murder scene at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. Not because anyone was looking for it at the time, because it was there and cameras were rolling. What investigators assembled was not one dramatic capture. It was a mosaic of partial glimpses across a geographic corridor, each frame individually inconclusive, assembled together into something that could not be explained away. The vehicle was in the wrong place at the wrong time too many times for coincidence to survive contact with a jury. In the Scott Murdaugh double murder investigation, the black box data from his own SUV testified against him with a precision no human witness could match, recording when the passenger window lowered electronically, when the vehicle stopped, the exact moment he accelerated away. The vehicle did not protect him. It cataloged him. In the Molly Tibbetts case, a vehicle with distinct markings was caught on camera driving back and forth along her jogging route. The footage showed it slowing as it approached her. One detail captured incidentally on roadside footage, a specific marking along the side of the vehicle, identified the car, and the car identified the killer. That was enough. In the Caitlin Armstrong case, her SUV was captured circling the area around the murder scene in the period immediately before a world-class cyclist was killed. The footage showed the circling, the reconnaissance, the waiting, a behavioral pattern identical in character to what Nancy Guthrie's own porch camera had recorded across January. And now consider the Celeste Rivas investigation, where a suspect stands charged in the murder and dismemberment of a 13-year-old girl. In that case, a Tesla became a central evidentiary asset. Every Tesla produced carries 360-degree exterior cameras, creating a continuous visual record of the vehicle's surrounding environment from all angles simultaneously. That capability transformed an ordinary personal vehicle into an unintentional witness, capturing what no human bystander thought to record. The principle at work in that case is identical to what makes every vehicle in Nancy Guthrie's orbit potentially significant. A rideshare car making an ordinary pickup, a daughter's husband driving his mother-in-law home after a family dinner, cameras recording passively, automatically, without awareness that anything they captured would ever matter. In every one of those frames, something may be present that was never meant to be captured and has not yet been fully examined. Now apply all of that to this case. 3 vehicles demand scrutiny. The first is the Uber driver's car. Its interior footage, its exterior footage including any front-facing cameras operating alongside the passenger feed, its black box data, its GPS route history, the driver's phone data showing where the car was before and after picking Nancy up. Whether every background vehicle visible in those camera frames has been identified, cross-referenced, and either eliminated or flagged is a question the Federal Review is now positioned to press in ways the original local investigation did not. The second is the blue Honda CR-V belonging to Annie Guthrie's husband, the vehicle that drove Nancy home that night. Honda CR-Vs carry navigation systems with route data and black box recorders that log when the vehicle moved, when doors opened and closed, what speed it was traveling. That vehicle was eventually impounded by investigators. The questions surrounding when it was impounded, how much time elapsed between the reported abduction and the formal seizure of that vehicle, and what data was extracted from it remain a thread of documented public concern. The data from that car will either confirm what has been stated or it will raise questions. Whether that car moved after a certain hour, whether a door opened at an unexpected time. The vehicle does not lie. The only question is whether the data was secured before it expired. The third vehicle is the one nobody has found. The ghost car. The vehicle in which Nancy Guthrie was removed from her neighborhood in the hours after 1:27 in the morning, driven through the Arizona desert, and taken to a destination that remains, to this day, unknown. Identifying that vehicle, its make, its color, its plate, the direction it traveled, is the single most consequential open question in this investigation. And the path to answering it runs directly through the surveillance corridor that Annie Guthrie mapped from memory. The blood on Nancy's porch is not a minor detail. It is forensic testimony. Analysts who examined photographs taken at the scene, photographs captured by journalists who should never have had access to an unsecured crime scene, described the deposit pattern as consistent with expiratory blood. Blood expelled from the nose or mouth under pressure. Droplets with 90-degree impact angles. Clear centers. Half-moon voids. Tiny satellite spatter alongside larger primary deposits. These patterns cannot be faked. The physics do not permit it. There is foliage on top of some of those blood deposits. Foliage analysts connected directly to the perpetrator's on-camera act of placing plant material over the surveillance lens. Pieces of it fell. They fell onto blood that was already there. The sequence of physical evidence tells the story in the order it happened. It places violence at this address, on this porch, on this night. Nancy Guthrie was not staged here. She was harmed here. And then she was taken. Through an entire surveillance ecosystem built by modern life, elementary schools, nail salons, gas stations, pharmacies, churches, residential ring doorbells, commercial security systems. A killer drove away with an 84-year-old woman and no confirmed footage of that vehicle has surfaced. Unless it has, and it was dismissed. Annie Guthrie drew a map. She shared it in a neighborhood group chat, a digital conversation among people who lived nearby and were desperate to help. The map showed a route Annie believed her mother's abductor had used to escape the neighborhood. She marked specific locations along the path and asked her neighbors to check their cameras, to look at what they had recorded on the night her mother disappeared. Annie did not live far from Nancy's home. She knew these roads not as a forensic specialist, but as a daughter who had driven them her entire adult life. And that knowledge, unremarkable on any other day, became one of the most significant contributions to this investigation made by anyone outside official law enforcement. That route passes Lulu Walker Elementary School, a public building with cameras positioned at multiple exterior points, their fields of view deliberately engineered to intersect and overlap so that no angle along the frontage goes uncovered. What one camera misses, the adjacent corner camera catches. A vehicle passing that school at 2:30 in the morning is not lost in daytime traffic volume. It is one of a vanishingly small number of vehicles in frame, and the overlapping coverage means multiple simultaneous opportunities to capture a color, a plate, a silhouette, a detail. The route also passes Green Toes North Nail Salon, a surveillance camera mounted directly toward the parking lot and the road beyond. At 2:00 or 3:00 in the morning, the number of vehicles passing that camera is near zero. Any car caught in that frame at that hour stands out with no ambiguity. The route passes Circa 79 Salon, a large commercial structure recently renovated by retail specialists, raising the documented question of whether cameras were operational, offline, or mid-rewiring during the transition period. A renovation of that scale almost certainly involved new security infrastructure. Whether that infrastructure was fully active on the night of January 30th is a specific, retrievable answer, and the kind of answer federal investigators are now positioned to demand. And then there are the intersections. At each point where a side street meets a major thoroughfare along Annie's proposed route, any driver must slow down. Self-preservation demands it. You do not accelerate through a blind intersection at 2:30 in the morning when you are transporting a kidnapping victim. You check the cross traffic. You pause. And in that pause, stationary, slowed, briefly exposed, the cameras facing those intersections have the best possible opportunity to capture something. A vehicle color, a partial plate, a make and model, a distinguishing detail on a bumper or door panel. The things invisible at speed become legible at 3 miles per hour. Those intersection frames may be the most critical footage in this entire investigation. Investigative reporter Dave Mack then did something straightforward and revelatory. He took Annie's map and overlaid it against a separate piece of evidence. A vehicle captured on a residential ring camera approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, on a back road, in the middle of the night, within the window consistent with the abduction timeline. That vehicle sighting had been reviewed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department and dismissed. When Mack overlaid the location of that ring camera sighting against the corridor of Annie's proposed escape route, the two did not merely overlap loosely. The dismissed vehicle fell directly within the route. The evidence the Sheriff's Department had discarded, the car that appeared on a back road near Nancy Guthrie's home in the hours her abduction occurred, aligned precisely with the escape path her own daughter had mapped from memory and local knowledge. A daughter's instinct, a reporter's overlay, a dismissed lead that may not be dismissed at all. And we have now learned that fresh eyes, federal eyes, are looking at all of it again. Fresh eyes do not get called in when things are going well. They get called in when the people closest to the evidence have been staring at it so long they can no longer see it clearly. The arrival of federal resources in this investigation is not just reinforcement. It is an acknowledgement that what happened to Nancy Guthrie deserved better than what it received from the moment Annie Guthrie walked into her mother's home and found a walker standing alone in the corner. And time is now a factor that cannot be overstated. Digital footage has retention windows. Businesses overwrite their security recordings on cycles of days or weeks. Residential cameras store locally or in the cloud with subscription-dependent timelines. Every day that passed without a specific request to preserve specific footage from a specific location was a day that footage inched closer to deletion. Some of the people who live and work along Annie's proposed escape route may have already erased and overwritten footage without ever knowing it held something relevant. Others may still have it, saved to cloud accounts, sitting on memory cards in cameras since replaced. The question of how many frames have already been lost to time is one this investigation may never fully answer. What remains, the footage that was collected, preserved, and handed to federal investigators, represents thousands of hours of video from public and private sources across the Tucson area. The task of reviewing that volume is methodical, exhausting, and frequently unrewarding, hour after hour of empty parking lots and headlights passing through frame at 3 in the morning, each one needing to be logged, compared, and either advanced or eliminated. It is also genuinely possible. One frame from the elementary school camera, one partial from the nail salon, one timestamp from an intersection where a driver had no choice but to slow. Individually, none of it may be enough. Together, it might be everything. Joe Scott Morgan, a forensic investigator with more than 10,000 documented investigations, identified those intersection points as particularly significant for a specific physical reason. At each location where the proposed escape route meets a major thoroughfare, a driver must reduce speed. The geometry demands it. A vehicle moving through a residential street at night, carrying a kidnapping victim, does not accelerate through a blind intersection with cross traffic. The instinct for self-preservation, not moral, not ethical, purely physical, forces a momentary deceleration. A California roll through a stop sign. A brief pause before pulling into traffic. 3 seconds, maybe 5. In the context of a surveillance investigation, those 3 to 5 seconds at each intersection along a 2.5-mile route represent multiple overlapping, sequential opportunities for the camera ecosystem of a modern American suburb to do exactly what it was built to do. The question Cheryl McCullum raised, and it lands with real force, is why, after more than 80 days, none of those opportunities appear to have yielded a confirmed result. McCullum, a crime scene investigator who was physically present at the scene during the investigation and observed the surrounding terrain directly, produced an answer grounded not in theory but in first-hand observation. The Arizona desert geography surrounding Tucson contains stretches of open land where a vehicle can deviate from mapped roads entirely. Hard rights and hard lefts into unlit terrain. Routes that bypass intersections completely. Paths that appear on no commercial map because they are simply open ground that a vehicle can traverse if the driver knows it is there. A perpetrator who spent weeks studying this neighborhood's rhythms and geography would have had ample opportunity to identify exactly those paths, to plot a route that threads between the cameras rather than through them. And yet there is a tension at the center of that conclusion that demands examination. If this perpetrator was careful enough to identify every camera along a 2.5-mile escape corridor and plan a route around all of them, if he was operating at that level of advanced precision, then why did he walk directly into the frame of Nancy Guthrie's front porch camera on multiple occasions? Why, across multiple visits spanning weeks, did he never approach from an angle that kept him out of its lens? The answer McCullum and others have argued is not a contradiction. It is a window into his psychology. He did not avoid that camera because he did not believe he needed to. His confidence was not built on anonymity. It was built on disconnection. He believed, apparently with complete certainty, that even if that footage was reviewed by every investigator in the country, no one was going to connect his face to a name. He was not hiding from the camera. He was walking past it, the way any person walks past something they have decided cannot hurt them. That belief in his own untouchability, in the completeness of his preparation, in the absence of any thread connecting him to Nancy Guthrie, is something behavioral analysts have documented in organized perpetrators before. It does not make him beyond reach. It makes him patterned. And patterns, eventually, leave evidence that even the most confident criminal cannot anticipate. And yet the Ring camera on a back road 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home captured something, a vehicle, at the right time, on a road that aligns directly with Annie's proposed corridor when the two are overlaid on the same map. That vehicle was seen. It was recorded. It was reported. And the Pima County Sheriff's Department looked at it and decided it was not worth pursuing. That decision did not occur in isolation. It occurred within an investigative environment already characterized by a series of consequential failures, each one compounding the next in the way that early errors in any investigation echo forward through everything that follows. Among the most publicly documented of those failures was the handling of the physical evidence at Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Because in the weeks following her disappearance, a theory emerged from outside the investigation, put forward publicly by a psychologist, that Nancy Guthrie had been killed or harmed elsewhere, and that the perpetrator had returned to her porch after the fact to stage the blood evidence. That he had collected her blood, transported it, and deposited it at the scene in order to manufacture the appearance of violence at the residence and mislead investigators. The forensic response to that theory, delivered by analysts who examined the photographic evidence in detail, is unambiguous. Blood expelled from the nose or mouth under respiratory pressure produces a physical signature that no staging technique can replicate. The air void patterns within the droplets, the 90-degree impact angles, the clear centers and half-moon contours in the larger deposits, the satellite spatter flanking the primary stains. These are the products of specific physics that require a living body under physical trauma to be present at that exact location at the moment of deposition. There is no transfer mechanism, no manual deposit process that generates that pattern. The forensic science involved is not interpretation, it is physical law. Nancy Guthrie was on that porch. She was harmed on that porch, and the pacemaker data which placed her at the residence until 2:29 in the morning independently confirms the timeline the blood evidence already establishes. Two pieces of evidence, generated by entirely different systems, telling the same story in convergent detail. That convergence is not coincidence, it is documentation. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County became, over the weeks following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, a figure whose public statements produced more confusion than confidence. He told the public that there were thousands of vehicles in the area at the relevant time, a characterization anyone with knowledge of rural Arizona traffic patterns at 2 and 3 in the morning would find difficult to reconcile with physical reality. He publicly stated, at a point when no credible forensic analyst believed it was plausible, that he thought Nancy Guthrie might still be alive. He offered the phrase, "Your guess is as good as mine," in the context of an active investigation into the disappearance of a vulnerable elderly woman. These were not minor rhetorical stumbles. They were public statements with real consequences, for community confidence, for the orientation of the investigation, and for a family that needed authoritative and honest leadership from the agency responsible for finding her. The accountability process that followed was procedurally significant. The county council gave Nanos a 10-day window to formally respond to questions about his conduct, including accusations of dishonesty and misuse of his office during an election cycle. His response arrived through his attorney, was not submitted under oath, and was described by observers as an undocumented account of behavioral explanations rather than a sworn, formally accountable statement of facts. Nanos found himself, by the accounting of those watching the procedural outcome, in what was described as uncharted career territory, having submitted a response that satisfied neither the legal standard nor the institutional expectations placed upon him. The council was subsequently left to determine whether to compel his appearance under oath and restart the entire formal review process from the beginning. The double bind this creates for the investigation is real. If Nanos is removed from his position while this case remains active, every decision made under his leadership becomes a potential line of attack for any future defense attorney. The missteps, the dismissed leads, the unsecured crime scene, the delayed impound of relevant vehicles, assembled together, They form a document of institutional failure that a skilled defense will use to challenge the integrity of every piece of evidence collected. Juries hear about investigative breakdowns. They weigh them. They wonder what else was mishandled that nobody yet knows about. On the other side of that calculation, keeping him in place means continuing under leadership that has demonstrably failed to earn the trust of the community, the family, or the analytical community watching from the outside. There is no clean path forward. There is only forward through the damage already done, with whatever remains intact. Joe Scott Morgan made an observation that carried the quiet authority of someone who has seen this pattern before. This case, he said, will be studied for years as an example of what not to do, not because the people involved were malicious, but because the decisions made in the earliest hours, before the scene was secured, before the family's testimony was centered, before camera footage began to expire, created a cascade of consequences that no subsequent effort can fully reverse. The beginning of an investigation is not a rehearsal. What you do in the first hours determines what you have to work with for every hour that follows. The question of whether the perpetrator acted alone or with assistance remains genuinely open. The evidence Cheryl McCullum cited in support of a lone actor is specific. Across every surveillance appearance, this individual has been identified in. Only one figure appears. Same approach, same clothing consistency, same behavioral pattern across every visit. The only change on the night of January 30th was the addition of a weapon and a backpack. If an accomplice existed and was operationally present across those multiple casing visits, McCullum argues, that person was never captured, not at the porch, not in the street, not in any footage that has been publicly identified. The counterargument remains logistical and unavoidable. Removing an 84-year-old woman who uses a walker, whose mobility is severely limited, from a private residence and into a waiting vehicle in the dark, is physically demanding work. Whether that work required two people or was executed by one individual who had planned for every physical variable with the same thoroughness he applied to everything else, cannot be determined from currently available public evidence. What can be said is that if accomplices exist, they have not appeared in any footage that has been publicly identified. The person on that porch camera is the only confirmed presence, and that person has not been named. The motive resists certainty in the same way. The most prominent thread analysts have followed leads to the public visibility of Nancy's daughter and the possibility that someone targeted an elderly woman living alone precisely because of who her child is. Whether the motive was financial, ideological, or personal in ways not yet publicly established, none of this has been confirmed. What has been confirmed is the deliberateness of the selection. This perpetrator did not find Nancy Guthrie by accident. He found her because he was looking for her specifically, and he came back, and back again, until he knew everything about her life that he needed to know. What is also documented, and what represents one of the most visible gaps in the public profile of this investigation, is the absence of a large-scale organized physical search for Nancy Guthrie. No shoulder-to-shoulder volunteer lines moving through the desert terrain surrounding Tucson. No publicly coordinated deployment of horses or all-terrain vehicles across the open landscape. The absence of visible large-scale searching does not confirm that no searching has occurred. Law enforcement operations are not always publicly announced. But the gap between the scale of national attention this case has received and the visible scale of physical search efforts has been noted by investigators and analysts who have followed it closely. If Annie Guthrie's proposed route represents a genuine escape corridor, then the direction it points, not only toward the cameras along it, but toward the open terrain beyond the mapped road network, toward the landscape a vehicle could have traversed once it left the suburban grid, is also a direction for physical search. The Arizona desert does not yield what it holds easily, but it does not hold it forever. The 911 call made when Nancy Guthrie was discovered missing has never been publicly released. Its contents, what was said first, what was reported first, who was initially identified as a concern, remain unknown to anyone outside the investigation. In missing persons cases, the first call often carries information that shapes the entire investigative trajectory. The language used, the suspicions named or pointedly not named, the emotional register of the caller set against the account they gave. That call exists somewhere in the record of this investigation, and its continued unavailability means that an entire dimension of the earliest moments of this case remains closed. What is not closed is the investigation itself. The FBI's involvement represents the most credible basis for hope this case has produced across its entire duration. Federal investigative agencies operate on timelines unconstrained by the political pressures that shape local law enforcement. They have resources no county sheriff's department can match: analytical tools, behavioral science capacity, jurisdictional reach that extends far beyond the borders of Pima County. And critically, as investigators working this case have framed it, the FBI controls the game clock, not the perpetrator, not the political situation surrounding local law enforcement, not the passage of days. The perpetrator controlled the night of January 30th. He controlled the weeks before it, moving through a neighborhood with impunity while an 84-year-old woman went about her life unaware. He controlled the route away from that neighborhood, threading through the camera ecosystem with what appears to have been careful advanced knowledge of the terrain. What he does not control is what happens in the analytical offices where investigators are now working, frame by frame, through the footage that was collected and preserved. What he does not control is whether the vehicle Dave Mack identified on that Ring camera, dismissed by local authorities, aligned directly with Annie's map when the two are overlaid, becomes the thread that unravels everything he believed he had secured. What he does not control is the possibility that somewhere in those thousands of hours of footage, at one of those intersections where any driver must slow, a camera caught something he did not know it caught. The game clock belongs to the federal investigation now, not to him. Annie Guthrie drew that map because she refused to accept that no one was going to find her mother. She did what families do when the systems around them move too slowly. She used what she had: her knowledge of the neighborhood, her certainty that her mother did not simply walk away into the desert night. That map led a reporter to an overlay. That overlay connected a dismissed lead to a proposed escape corridor. And that connection is now in the hands of investigators with the resources, the mandate, and the time to follow it wherever it leads. If you know anything about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, anything at all, the tip lines remain open. No arrest is required. No conviction is required. A tip, a memory, a piece of footage on a camera someone forgot to check, a vehicle that looked out of place on a back road in the middle of a January night. It matters. All of it matters. The cases that get solved are the cases that people refuse to stop talking about. If you want to follow every development as it emerges, subscribe to Crime Unresolved TV and leave a like if this coverage has kept you informed. Because Nancy Guthrie's story is not finished, and neither are we.